Today was day 28 in Karen Read's retrial, and there was one witness on the stand for the entire day, and he's not quite done testifying yet. He is going to continue his testimony on Monday, but it's most likely going to be only for a couple of minutes, and then the defense will move on to their next witness. Now, this is a witness that goes by the name of Dr. Wolf. You may have heard of him once or twice before if you've been following this case. Dr. Wolf is the director of accident reconstruction for a company known as ARCA. ARCA is a company that's hired by other companies like the NHL and the Department of Defense. Now, they work nationally and internationally, and Dr. Wolf himself has already overseen over 1,000 cases of reconstruction. He has a bachelor's in science and engineering, a PhD in electrical and computer engineering, and he is ACTAR certified. He also has a proficiency in photogrammetry. Photogrammetry is actually very important in this case, and it's the science of being able to use photographs to be able to perform reconstructions. So he actually did not view Karen Read's Lexus itself, and he said it's not necessary if you know how to perform accident reconstruction based on photogrammetry. So moving on to when he was hired. So he was hired initially not by the defense. He was hired initially, as we all know, by the federal government. So Alan Jackson had to make sure that that was brought out, that when they performed their initial reconstruction in this case, they were not influenced at all or did not have any sort of communications with the defense at all. Now, he went through some of the materials that he was provided before he performed his initial reconstruction. Now, it's important to note there's two different testings that he did. The first testing was, as we know, at the request of the federal government, and he's provided the following materials. He provided the death report, crime scene report, the dispatch removal report, photos and videos of the scene and evidence, CDR report, the Lexus, copies of pictures of the Lexus, the autopsy photos, and report. Now, he was asked, did you have enough information to perform a reconstruction? And he said, absolutely. He had completely enough information to perform a full reconstruction. Now, he's also not provided any sort of theory. He wasn't told, can you reconstruct where this Lexus is backed up into a human or any other way? He was just given the evidence, the pictures, and said, try to figure out how this all happened. So he noticed that there was some damage to the vehicle in the right rear tail light, and there was a dent above the lift gate and a wraparound section, and the bumper had superficial scrapes, but the bumper was not displaced. Now, usually the bumper gets displaced with accidents above 15 to 20 miles per hour, but in this case, there was no displacement. Now, he did notice that there were some pieces of glass on the bumper. Now, he knows that there is no glass found in the taillight and there was no broken windows. So that left open the question of how did this glass get there? But he did find out also that there was a drinking glass that was located at the scene. So he began his testing in late 2023 into early 2024. Now, he did try to reconstruct how this glass could have perhaps shattered the taillight, and that's why he built a cannon, a pressurized cannon, to perform these tests, these tests in a controlled state. And they shot this glass from the cannon going 31 miles per hour and 37 miles per hour, and that's how they were able to simulate that it's possible that this drinking glass could have been thrown at the taillight at 37 miles per hour and then caused the damage to the taillight. Now, he's not concluding absolutely that that's what happened in this case, but he did test for it, and he found that it was consistent. He also did a drop test to see whether the head of John O'Keefe could have caused the damage to the taillight, and they realized very quickly that even going at 15 miles per hour, the damage to the vehicle was much more than the damage that was observed on Karen Read's Lexus, and at that mile per hour, it would not have caused a skull fracture. So they had to rule out that as a conclusion or an opinion. So that was ruled out. Couldn't have been that the car hit John O'Keefe in the head. Now, another thing which was very important in this case when he was doing all his reconstruction is that he had to make sure that the taillight was cold because, as we know, Karen Read was driving the car in the middle of a blizzard and it was freezing outside. So he kept putting the taillights that he was testing in the freezer before he tested or performed any of his tests. Now, he also had to use an exemplar Lexus. So there's a lot of companies that are buying exemplar Lexuses because of this case. So he used an exemplar Lexus to test and run through some of the tests that he did. Now, the first time that he was contacted by the defense in this case was February of 2025. So again, initially he began his reconstruction at the request of the federal government, as we all know, at the end of 2023 and early 2024. The defense did not contact him until February of 2025 for additional testing and to retain his services or ARCA's services. So they initially had a conversation in February, then they had a conversation in March. Now, I thought when I was watching this trial that Alan Jackson was about to ask him questions about their communications with each other with the Signal app. As we know, this is one of the points of cross-examination that Hank Brennan was going to bring out. So, like a good lawyer, what you try to do is when it's your witness, you bring out all the damaging information about yourself right away or about this witness right away so that you can present it in a way that you think is more favorable to the jury. Now, it seems to me, and I'm getting more convinced about this by the day or by the minute, that Alan Jackson really wanted to bring out this information himself, which is what you're supposed to do, but there was an objection. And then there was a sidebar, and then he had to move on. So something tells me, and I think it's more than a hunch at this point, that Judge Cannone did not allow him to ask these type of questions about their communications on Signal. Which again, I'm not sure why. And again, this is some speculation here, but it just seems that was the road that he was going on. And then there was an objection, and then he had to switch gears. So that's what I think may have happened there. Okay, well, moving on, he was asked to review Dr. Welchure's report. Now, you'll remember Dr. Welchure. Dr. Welchure was the Commonwealth's expert accident reconstruction, and he also performed some sort of reconstruction. What he did was, as some of you are familiar, he put some blue paint on the back of his exemplar Lexus and backed it into his arm while he was wearing John O'Keefe's clothing and his hat, going 2 miles per hour. And he showed that the paint can get on his arm around the same area where John O'Keefe's injuries were. So that was the extent, really, of Dr. Welchure's accident reconstruction. So he asked him some questions about Dr. Welchure's report and his reconstruction. So he asked him, was there any point in what Dr. Welchure did to dress up like John O'Keefe? Because after all, he was just showing that the arm can align with the taillight. And of course, Dr. Wolf said, yeah, he didn't see any reason at all why he had to go purchase the same exact clothing of John O'Keefe. The only question was whether the only question that he answered in his reconstruction is that he showed that his arm could align with the taillight. And Dr. Wolf said, actually, people with different heights can also align their arm with the taillight if they choose. They just pick their arm up or down and they can align it. So the fact that Dr. Welchure was similar to the height of John O'Keefe really doesn't make much of a difference in this case. So he also asked him, well, what about the 2 mile per hour test? Did that really did that answer any questions about this reconstruction? And again, he said, no, not really. It doesn't really show any questions or answer any questions for force or accelerations. And there's no testing to see if the damage of the vehicle is consistent or the range of speed the Lexus was going. As we heard from Dr. Welchure, he has no idea how fast the car could have been going when it hit John O'Keefe. There's also no testing of the movement of John O'Keefe's body after the impact. Now, another thing that he pointed out as they're going through more of the reconstruction that Dr. Wolf did was the fact that there's a diffuser here. There's an internal diffuser. It's an interior component inside the taillight. So there's the outside of the taillight, which we're all familiar with, but then even parts inside the taillight were broken and fractured. So he understood that you need to provide enough force in this reconstruction, enough force and energy to not only break the outside of the taillight, which is, again, is very hard plastic, but also to break the interior components of the taillight. And there's also a top portion of the taillight, which was also damaged. And he also noticed that there was about 50 fragments of taillight, which he was able to recount. We know it's somewhere around that neighborhood. And he also talked about the series of holes in the sweatshirt. And this is going to be significant in the specific reconstruction that Dr. Wolf performed. So he talked about the holes on the sweatshirt, and they are 3 to 5 millimeter holes. Then he gave a little class on Newton's 3 laws of physics. And he said that Dr. Welchure did not really engage in any force analysis using these 3 laws of physics. All he did was dress up like John O'Keefe and paint the Lexus blue and have it back into him at 2 miles per hour. So there was none of these laws of physics that were really that Dr. Welchure used at all. Okay. So then moving on, he spoke about the scientific method. Now, if you were following cross-examination, then you know that Robert Alessi kept talking about the scientific method. Well, now Dr. Wolf is asked, well, what is the scientific method? And he says, well, the scientific method is simple. You have observations, then you do some research, you develop an hypothesis, you test with experiments, then maybe you develop more hypothesis, and you test with more experiments, you analyze the data, and then you report your conclusions. So He said that he was going to ask. He asked him actually, did Dr. Welchure perform the scientific method? Although that question was objected to, because the way Judge Cannoni allows cross-examination, which again can be frustrate a lot of lawyers, is that she does not allow one expert to say that another expert didn't do something. All you're allowed to do in Judge Cannoni's courtroom is say what you did. You can't say, well, I did this and that expert did not do this. She doesn't allow that second part. So that we kept seeing that same pattern play out today with the cross-examination. Okay, then he got onto the actual testing. So let's pull up and we'll see the different testing that he did, and you'll see right away the difference between Dr. Wolf's accident reconstruction and Dr. Welcher's accident reconstruction. You'll all remember the paint test. I don't have to play that again for you. That's where he painted the Lexus exemplar taillight blue, and he backed it into him going 2 miles per hour, and that was the extent of his test. Well, now we'll see if Dr. Wolf has some other tests that he thinks may be more appropriate to do in this. So the first test that he did was in the lab. The first two tests that he did was in the lab, and it was going 10 miles per hour. So he had the taillight, and this wasn't actually with a Lexus, it was with a taillight that was connected to some other device, and he had a dummy, which is what I thought we were going to see from Dr. Welchure, but this is what Dr. Wolf actually did. He did have a dummy there to test this speed going at 10 miles per hour. So this is what it looked like in the lab. And this is, by the way, in slow motion. So this is really 10 miles per hour, but I'm just showing it to you in slow motion.
Can I ask?
So as you can see from this reconstruction of going at 10 miles per hour in the lab, and again, this is not with a real Lexus, this is with a taillight that's attached to some contraption, and they're able to make it go 10 miles per hour. You see that the taillight was not broken at all, and there's nothing that was torn or pierced in the sweatshirt either. So that was a very simple test right there. Now, this is where Alan Jackson kind of stopped for a second. He said, oh yeah, I forgot to ask you, did we pay you for your reconstruction? And he said, yeah, the first time from the first trial, they didn't pay for the reconstruction, but that was paid by the federal government. Obviously, we all know that. But the testimony that he gave, the time, he had to pay up around $20,000 for that. What about this time? Everyone's wondering how much were they paid this time? And we know that there's a contract with Aperture with the Commonwealth up to close to $400,000. Well, when it came to ARCA, he said that this time, for all their testing and everything, they were paid so far $50,000. So that is what he spoke about next. Okay, so that was the first test. And now let's move on to the second test. So they did the second test also in the lab. And let's just pull it up for you right here. And this was at 17 miles per hour. Okay, so the first one is at 10 miles per hour. And there's obviously no damage at all to the vehicle and no damage to the sweatshirt. So now let's see what it looks like going 17 miles per hour.
What are we looking at here?
So you're looking at a top-down view from the high-speed camera. You'll see the taillight enter from the left, impacting the arm at about 17 miles per hour.
Okay.
And this is it again. I just want to make sure that we're on the right speed here. We are on the right speed. It's just speed up a little bit so you can see, but it is on slow motion.
Go ahead and play it. Can you describe the decoupling that's shown here?
Absolutely.
Okay, so looking at that, you see that there at 17 miles per hour, the taillight did break a little bit. However, there was no holes in the sweatshirt at all that was caused by that impact. Again, this is the second test that was done in the lab. And just to show you what the taillight looked like after this test and to see the comparison between the test and what Karen Read's Lexus looked like, let's just pull that up for a minute so you can see that. And there you go. That's what it looked like. And obviously that's very different than what Karen Read's taillight looked like. See if I can get a quick picture of that. There were some pieces that broke off as he showed. Just want to see if he shows a comparison. And this is the comparison. If you can see, this is a comparison between Karen Read's taillight and the taillight that was broken going 17 miles per hour in the laboratory test. So that was the next test. So then they actually went out to the field and they did a test with a dummy. And this time they actually had a real Lexus backing up into the dummy. So let's move ahead here to V07. Give me 1 second. We'll get there in 1 moment. Here we go. And again, it's on slow motion, so you can see. But again, this is going at 15 miles per hour. And if you can see this, then you see that they just have an arm hanging there. And Dr. Wolf said that there's really no difference between whether the arm is hanging there or whether there's a full body dummy there. It's all the same for his calculations. So that shouldn't throw you off. But you got the arm there, and they're going to see soon a Lexus backing up into the arm at 15 miles per hour.
This video?
So as you saw from that test, really there was no damage at all to the vehicle, no damage to the taillight. So that was going 15 miles per hour, and that was more of a side swipe type of collision. And then he moved on to the next test that he did. And this was when the Lexus was going 29 miles per hour. So again, going 29 miles per hour. Again, with the same arms sticking out there. Here we go. And this is what it looked like.
Okay.
Now, if we just stop it right there, I'm stopping right there because that's literally almost exactly what Dr. Welchure showed in his report, in his accident reconstruction. He showed his basically exactly what we're seeing right now in front of us on the screen. So they did that. And then this is the damage that resulted. So that's just again, one more time.
Next.
Okay, so that's what happened there. And then take a look at what it looked like, what the damage of the taillight looked like afterwards, and see if it's the same exact damage as Karen Read's Lexus. I have to go a little bit ahead. Give me 1 second. We'll get there in a moment. Here we go. So that is the comparison. So you see Karen Read's Lexus on the right, which is the taillight, which is basically completely gone. And on the left, this is even going at 29 miles per hour. There's still plenty of taillight still there. So he said, again, that was inconsistent. And also, the interior diffusers, which is a very important part. That's the interior part of the taillight, which also in Karen Read's Lexus was broken. The interior diffusers. And in this 29 mile per hour vehicle test that Dr. Wolf performed with basically exactly the same way that Dr. Welchure had it, the interior diffusers had a very small crack, but it wasn't near to the same damage that was on Karen Read's Lexus. Okay, so then he performed another test. Now, this is also a very interesting test because this is the test where you have the arm of the dummy, which is dressed up in the sweatshirt of John O'Keefe. And we'll see whether there's any damage. Now, this is where it's going 24 miles per hour. So the Lexus is going 24 miles per hour backwards. Is basically the extent of the 1162-2 tech stream event, as we all know, which is where they assumed this collision happened. And the max speed was 24 miles per hour. So this is going the max speed of that 1162/2 tech stream event, as we all have heard about, and the trigger event. So this is the most consistent with any of the evidence that this is when it happened. And let's see, I mean, in the worst case scenario, right? So we'll see what happens here. Take a look. And again, almost exactly where Dr. Welchure had his arm. Almost exactly the same. So that is what it looked like. And now let's see what the taillight looks like. So taillight looks like the following. Here. right there. And you can see, even going at 24 miles per hour, Karen Read's taillight looks a lot more damaged than the 24 mile per hour test that Dr. Wolf performed with this Lexus exemplar, and putting the arm exactly where Dr. Welcher said he thought it was. And there you go. And then again, even on this test, the internal diffusers were not damaged, and Karen Read's were significantly damaged. So you have only a small crack, and again, no consistency with this, what happened in this testing, and what they found in Karen Read's Lexus. Also, very significantly, there was no holes in the sweatshirt. So remember, the theory here by the Commonwealth is that when it exploded on John O'Keefe's arms, that's what caused these cuts or pierces in his sweatshirt, and which caused those 9 holes. They weren't dog bites. They were just these 9 holes that the Lexus caused by the taillight smashing into his arm. The next test that they did was where there's a full impact. This is a direct body impact. This is probably just to really beat a dead horse where they did this. And you can take a look. The camera wasn't working perfectly for this test, but let's just pull it up. This is what the Lexus looked like after more of a direct impact. So this would be an impact where it wasn't just his arm, it also hit him somehow. And if it hit him, you see him flying down backwards. I mean, the dummy, at least, you find flying backwards. And you see how damaged the vehicle is. It's completely dented. It's broken. The windows are, the back window is completely shattered. And the bumper is popped out. And so this was the final test that he did. So all the testing that he did from all these testing, Dr. Wolf said, look, it's just inconsistent. The damage to the vehicle that we're seeing in Karen Read's Lexus is just inconsistent with the Commonwealth's theory that it was backed up into John O'Keefe's arm. So that was essentially the direct examination of Dr. Wolf. And then we moved on to cross-examination. So Hank Brennan first started off cross-examination in the following way, which you'll recall that I said that ARCA works for like the NHL and they work for the Department of Defense. Well, you left out a few things, didn't you? So listen to what Hank Brennan does here, and actually later it comes to kind of bite him, because take a look.
You were telling them about working with the Department of Defense that really had nothing to do with you. That was ARCA before you began working there.
So the first part he said is that you didn't really do any work for the NHL. You didn't really do any work personally for the Department of Defense. That was just what the company does, not what you personally do. Okay.
As a whole, yes, the work that we do, yes.
Not you.
As I said, I wasn't involved specifically in that project, no.
And you mentioned that you did some stuff, or the company does some things for the NHL.
Yes.
You didn't tell us much more about what you do. There's other things that ARCA does as far as clients, right?
Certainly.
Did you share with us that you work for lawyers and law firms?
Yes, we do.
And you do litigation, insurance companies?
Yes.
Okay. So
So he also brought out that, you don't just do all this, really special work for the Department of Defense and designing Jeeps or for the NHL, making sure that players are safe, but you also do some litigation work. You work for lawyers. You work for insurance companies. And the reason why Brennan wanted to bring that out, most likely, is to show, okay, so, you like this work that you do for the defense firms and for insurance companies, making all that money working for them also, right? Okay. So he brought that point out. Which is going to actually, I think, backfire in the redirect. He also brought out the following fact, and we'll just put this down for a moment because we're going to come back to it soon. But then he also brought out the fact that he only became the director of accident reconstruction for ARCA in January of 2024. So pretty recent. You're not like been the director there for 30 years. Still, says something about him. He rose through the ranks, and now he's the director. But he's just pointing out that you only recently became the director in January 2024. Also, a very interesting point that Brennan made, and this was a good point, I think, is that he had to retake one of the portions of the test in order to become ACTAR certified. So to become ACTAR certified, you have to take 2 different parts of the test. One's a multiple choice, and one's a practical test. And he didn't pass the practical test the first time, and he had to take it again. So that was a decent point that he brought up. Okay. Then he moved on to talk about his CV, that the CV only mentions pedestrians 3 times. He has no publications in pedestrian accidents, and he didn't take any classes on pedestrian collisions. And he also Brennan thought that he didn't ever give any presentations on pedestrian collisions, but then he actually was wrong about that because he actually does give presentations on pedestrian collisions. He just did not include that in his CV. Then he brought out all this communication that he had with the defense. So he said that before you testified in the first trial, you did communicate with the defense, right? That's true. And he said, yes, I mean, when I performed the reconstruction, I didn't, but you're right. I did have communications with the defense, mostly logistically, just how to come to the court, what time you're going to need me to testify, etc. But he also brought out the fact that there were some other communications that were back and forth, including the outline, which before he got there, he also said that he spoke about the court order. And this is where it comes into the text messages, the signal text messages. And he said that you were ordered by the court to provide those text messages to the defense. How many text messages were there? And he said there was about 100, 50 from him, probably 50 from Alan Jackson, mostly, again, about logistics. And he did provide whatever he could to the court because he was under a court order after all. And but he did delete the text chain. He just deleted the text chain because, he's not going to keep it on forever. He's had the text chain for a while, so they just deleted it. And then he also... So I'm sorry. That was right. So that was some of the text messages, and also he spoke about the Signal app, and it's an encrypted app, and it's the first time he's ever was asked to use Signal as an app, and apparently that's how Alan Jackson's defense team works. They work on the Signal app. It's encrypted. It's secure. I mean, there's nothing wrong with using secure communication when you're talking about this type of case. You don't want anybody hacking in or whatever else can be left insecure. So I mean, there's nothing crazy about it, but he did bring out the fact that this is the first time that you were asked to use the Signal app. And then he got onto the outline that was prepared before the first trial. Now, remember, this is the outline that was provided by Dr. Wolf on his own initiative to Alan Jackson. And Alan Jackson most likely did not even see that because it was provided to him the night before he was going to be called as a witness. And as an attorney, I'm sure when your most important witness is going to be called the next day, you're going to have your outline all ready for him weeks before, at least, right? Maybe at least days before. Let's just say that. Most likely weeks before. But he still said that's something that he normally does in all his cases. He prepares outlines, and that's why he did it. And then he went through some of the comments that he made on the outline, like the fact that he told Alan Jackson that it's not necessary to inspect the vehicles and they had enough information. You have to make that clear to the jury. So does it look like you're trying to help the defense? It looks like you're not being partial and you're not being objective and independent. And he is saying, no, I would have said the same thing to both sides, the Commonwealth and the defense, because I just want to make sure that the jury understands that you don't need to actually inspect the vehicle to get this information. And he also said the fact that something about, he said, if you don't want me to say that, that's fine. Something about that there's a correlation between the time of day and pedestrian fatalities, which is usually at nighttime. Pedestrians usually die at night because cars can't see them. So he said something like, if you don't want me to say that, I can leave it out. And he asked, well, why would you? It sounds like you're strategizing with the defense here. And he said, well, I just don't want to confuse the jury. Like, it's not really such an important part of this case and it's not relevant here. So should I even mention it? And that's why I was just concerned about whether the jury is going to be confused or not. Nevertheless, it was a point that Hank Brennan made. Then he said, he went through the line of, well, would you correct a mistake that you made in court on your own initiative? Because he brought up last time that he made a mistake. He said that he was qualified as an expert witness over 20 times, and really it's inaccurate. He was only qualified 11 times, but he was counting also his depositions that he gave. So he was a little mistaken there. And he asked him, well, you didn't clarify that on your own with the court. And he said, yeah, well, that's not usually how this works. I usually get asked questions. So I offered it to Alan Jackson that if he can ask me a question, I'm happy to clarify it. But that was his call. Okay. And then he got into very interesting. He's asked him about confirmation bias. Do you have any confirmation bias in this case? And he said no. And then it looked like he was going to present him, or like he did present him, with apparently what could have been some Facebook posts by his wife. And this was news to me, but apparently his wife, and from the reports that I've heard a little bit, again, this is speculation probably at this point, but this is what I've heard, that his wife, after the first trial, joined some sort of Facebook group of Free Karen Read. So he had some of these, I guess, these posts by Dr. Wolf's wife. So he was going to present him or confront him with those Facebook posts. And he asked him, do you know what I'm talking about? Or he showed him the document. He says, I have no idea what, I don't know. I've never seen this before. I don't know what you're talking about. So he wasn't really able to explore that much further. Then he went on to what Dr. Rentler's report says. And in Dr. Rentler's report, there's a reference there There's a lot of footnotes. And one of the references is a book about something about skin and sweater, specifically how skin and sweaters interact when they are under some sort of force, like backing up into a vehicle, backing up into a person who's wearing a sweater, and what type of effect that would have on his skin. So he was asked if he reviewed that book, and he said no, that Dr. Welchure is his own area. I do a separate evaluation. Yeah, so something about holes in sweaters, trying to suggest that the holes in the sweater maybe wouldn't have been pierced with the sweater by the Lexus, because you're using a dummy arm and not a real skin arm. So that's kind of what the suggestion he's making there. But he just simply said, I according to my reconstruction, it could have been there or shouldn't have been there. He doesn't think there's any difference between the skin and the hybrid 3 arm, which is what the dummy's arm is made of, or what it's called. Okay. Well, anyway, that was another point that he made. So moving on, he also said that in your first reconstruction that you performed for the federal government, he didn't say the federal government, but we all know for the federal government, you didn't use dummies. You didn't use dummy tests in that case, right? And he said, no, he only used it in the second reconstruction. Okay. Then he also asked him if he analyzed about how the glass would land, or the pieces of taillight would land near his body. Did you analyze that part, how the glass that John O'Keefe was holding would end up near his body? And he said, no, he didn't analyze that part either. He also pointed out the fact that he provided his report on May 7th. Again, the trial started in April, as we keep hearing, and we have these reports that are being produced in the middle of trial. Now, we do not hear redirect on this point quite yet, but we are most likely going to hear Alan Jackson say that, well, why did you provide your report on May 7th? When did you get Dr. Welchure's report? So you can obviously only produce a new report when you get Dr. Welchure's report. So that's going to come out, but Hank Brennan just first said that he provided his report May 7th, which sounds like it's providing very late in the middle of a trial. And he also provided the PowerPoint just on Wednesday. Okay. Then he also spoke about the exact position of the body when it was said, you don't know the exact position of the body, right? And he, after some back and forth about this, he agreed that he doesn't know the exact position of the arm. He was going based on what Dr. Welchure said. So yeah, I don't know the exact position. So if Dr. Welchure had the position off, you're right. Everything's off. So, but he was going based on Dr. Welchure's theory in this case about how the arm was positioned. So they kind of went in circles with that for a little bit. Then he brought out a very interesting fact. He brought out a very interesting fact that John O'Keefe's arm weighed 11.86 pounds. And there is a dummy arm that you could use, which is 12 pounds. And Dr. Wolf decided to use a 9.38 pound dummy arm. So this seemed a little interesting. Why would you choose, Dr. Wolf? Why would you choose to use a 9.38 pound arm instead of a 12 pound arm? Don't you think that a 12 pound arm is closer to 11 pounds than 9.38, and it is closer? So he went through these type of questions for a little bit, and Dr. Wolf just kept saying, it's not really going to make a difference. It's just that little amount between 9.38 and 11.86 or 12. It's all going to react the same way. There's not really going to be much of a difference. But what Brennan wanted to do was say, well, the difference there is 26.3%. So if you account for the 26.3% difference in the weight, well, then you should deduct 23.6% when it comes to speed in all of your tests, which means that all of the speeds of your tests, you should deduct 26.3%. And on this part, Dr. Wolf did not give it an inch. He said, no, that's absolutely wrong. That's not what you do to account for that difference. In fact, there's not going to be a difference in this specific reconstruction, the fact that there's a difference of a pound or two in the dummy arm. So, but Brennan kept asking about this 26.3 difference and trying to, he went through all the tests and started asking about the 26.3 difference. And every time he asked him, Dr. Wolf said, I don't agree with you that you should deduct the speed of all these tests by 26.3% just by the fact that the weight of the dummy arm is a little bit different. Okay. So he went through some of the tests, and he also showed in some of the tests that you see the pieces of taillight flying, and you see some of the pieces of taillight which are close to the sweater of John O'Keefe. So maybe it actually did pierce the sweater. So he was going through some of that. And then he also showed Rescue Randy. Now, Rescue Randy was when it was the direct impact. The direct impact, which was I think it was the last test that I showed you, was where the entire Lexus was smashed to smithereens. The window was smashed, and Rescue Randy went flying backwards. Now, Rescue Randy is just what they call the dummy in that case. Okay, so Rescue Randy is a dummy that weighs 200 pounds, and he was showing a lot of pictures from that, even though the Commonwealth's theory here is not that there was a direct impact. So I don't know why he spent so much time on the direct impact test when that test really is not the theory of the Commonwealth. Because he also showed him showed him that because of the road rash, where this Rescue Randy, when it was smashed, going, was it 29 miles per hour at a direct impact, it flew backwards and slid on the ground on the concrete, and the sweater actually was torn in certain parts of the sweater. So he was showing him that. And again, that's a direct impact, which the Commonwealth is not even claiming happened in this case. Okay. He also showed him that some of the debris field, showing that how some of the pieces of the taillight, when they do get smashed, they get spread around. Okay, fine. Then he also brought out the following fact. He brought out the following fact that, you don't know for sure when the collision happened in this case, right? 1162-2, which we are all familiar with at this point, that text stream event just shows that the car was thrown into reverse at a certain time. And the accelerator is pushed down more than 30%. That's all it means. You don't know exactly within that event or even after that event when there was a collision. And the last data point is the car going 24 miles per hour. You're right about that. But we also saw that the last data point, the accelerator was pushed 70%, which would suggest that the car is going to speed up even more after whatever was captured in that 1162-2 event. So it is possible, Hank Brennan said to him, that she was going even faster. Maybe she even sped up to 7 miles per hour, even faster than 24 miles per hour. So maybe the suggestion here by Hank Brennan is that she was actually going, 31 miles per hour. Who knows? So you don't know exactly when the collision happened. And that's true. Okay. So moving on, he spoke about the sneaker. As you know, the sneaker that was found by the curb. And we know that pedestrian impact, sometimes the sneaker comes off. Okay, he also spoke about the hat falling off, and he said that wasn't part of his investigation, the hat. He did know about the sneaker, but it didn't really affect his investigation or reconstruction either. Okay, so finally, then we got to redirect, which is very interesting, which I want to show you why it could be Hank Brennan's line about the insurance company really backfired. I think it really backfired because if you don't let the jury know anything about insurance, then maybe the jury's going to think maybe this was an insurance company. They just know that ARCA, at this point, before Hank Brennan asked that line of questioning, they know that ARCA sometimes is hired by the NHL, sometimes by the Department of Defense, and that is the extent of it. They don't know how they were involved in this case. All they know is that initially they were not hired by the defense. But in the first trial, we heard some reports that maybe the jury was thinking that they were actually hired by an insurance company for Karen Read, which would mean that they want them, meaning the insurance company does not want to be responsible for Karen Read, would hire ARCA to figure out how this did not happen. And that way they would not be responsible for, covering any sort of liability or other coverage issues that the insurance company may have. So that was not spoken about at all in the first trial, but Hank Brennan did bring that out in cross-examination, and therefore that opened the door for some more. But before we get there, let's first talk about the first part of redirect, which is also, I think, very, very good point that Alan Jackson brought out. And this has to do with how it would even be possible for the sweater to get damaged by the taillight. So listen to this, because this is a very important part, and this can really also seal the deal for the defense here. Listen to this.
The debris that comes off of the taillight, the fragments, what speed would they be going at the point of impact when they crack and are released from the taillight?
So in case you can't hear so well, Alan Jackson asked them, how fast would the pieces of taillight be going at the point of impact? So assuming the car is going backwards, 24 miles per hour, smashes into John O'Keefe and his arm and his sweater, so everything gets smashed, how fast would those pieces of taillight be traveling at that moment?
At the impact speed or less.
So as fast as the car, 24 miles per hour, or less, which is also the same speed that John O'Keefe's arm would be going and the sweater would be going. So listen to the next part.
To penetrate the sweatshirt and cut the arm across, would the shards have to be going faster or slower than the arm?
They would have to be going faster. If they're moving at a common velocity with the arm relative to it, they would somehow have to accelerate with more speed to to catch up and go beyond the arm, essentially.
Is that physically possible?
No.
So that is a very strong point, because one of the Hank Brennan did was he showed that, look, when it breaks, you see some of the pieces of plastic are very close to the sweater. That may be true, but in order for the piece of plastic to speed up and pierce the sweater, it would have to go faster than everything else moving at that point, which is everything's moving at 24 miles per hour. So if everything's moving at 24 miles per hour, how is that piece of plastic going to catch up to the sweater and put a hole in it? The only way possible is if somehow the piece of plastic speeds up, which he asked him, is that possible? And he said, quite frankly, no, it's not possible, which would mean that those piercings, those holes in the sweatshirt got there some other way. Now, moving on to the insurance part. Listen to this.
You were asked on cross-examination about some of the work that ARCA does on behalf of private lawyers, even insurance companies, correct?
Correct.
You were not hired by an insurance company. That's not who hired you on behalf of Ms. Reed or anything like that in the initial hire, correct?
Correct. It was not an insurance company.
Thank you.
So that is why Hank Brennan, it kind of backfired on Hank Brennan right there, because now the jury cannot think that her insurance company hired ARCA. And again, for the Commonwealth, they want the jury to perhaps think that, just like they did in some jurors thought that in the first trial. But because Hank Brennan opened the door, so he thought he was showing that, oh, yeah, ARCA, you also work for insurance companies. But once he opened that door, so Alan Jackson was actually, they had a sidebar first, and I sense that's where he was going here. And then he came back and he was able to ask these questions because, hey, Hank Brennan put the suggestion in their minds, and now I have to correct that. And therefore, that's why he was able to correct that. And a great point for the defense right there. So that was some of the redirect. He's not done with the redirect quite yet. We're going to continue with the redirect on Monday. But he also did, again, stress the point that the fact that the arm weighed 11.8 pounds. And also here's an interesting part he brought out on redirect. John O'Keefe's arm was never weighed. It was never actually weighed and shown to be 11.8 pounds. It's just based on a statistic, based on his height and his weight, how much his arm in a statistic way would weigh. Generally, someone that's 6'2", 217 pounds, his arm would be 11.8 pounds. But it doesn't, no one ever weighed it. Nobody knows for sure how much his arm weighed. So that was number one part. And number two is that, again, stressing, would that have made any sort of difference in any of your calculations or any reconstruction? And Dr. Wolf said, of course, no, that would have not made any difference. So he also brought out the fact about this 26.3% that Hank Brennan keeps saying that therefore you should reduce the speed. And he got him to say very easily that again, as he was saying this throughout cross-examination, but again, he reiterated it on redirect, that's completely improper. That's not what you're supposed to do with this difference in weight with these equations. So that was the extent of redirect today, and we're going to be continuing the redirect on Monday. So that's going to be it for day 28. If you haven't yet, please subscribe and like, and we will see you next time.